Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we're venturing beneath the marble floors of the world's most sacred city, the Vatican, and asking a question that has echoed through centuries. Why were angels locked away while Satan roams free in legend? Behind those gilded halls and soaring domes lies a tapestry of faith and fear, devotion and dread. We'll uncover hidden archives, fragile parchments, and whispered testimonies that reveal a truth both beautiful and unsettling. But don't let the splendor blind you. Human hands made these choices, and human hearts felt their consequences. If you're as fascinated by these hidden corridors of history as I am, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if these journeys truly speak to you. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. So dim the lights, settle in, and let's descend together into a story of divine rebellion, forbidden knowledge, and the secret prison beneath St. Peter's. In the early decades of the first century, fragments of a troubling text circulated among Christian communities in Syria and Palestine. Known today as the Epistle of Jude, this brief letter, likely penned between AD 65 and 80, warned its readers that forgotten angels had abandoned their proper dwelling and now awaited judgment in everlasting chains under darkness. Centuries later, these words inspired collections of lore about rebellious celestial beings. The most influential of these was the Book of Enoch, composed in stages between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD, which expanded the story of the Watchers, a group of angels who took human wives and imparted forbidden knowledge. At the Council of Laodicea around AD 363, church leaders excluded Enoch from the biblical canon, fearing its vivid accounts of fallen angels might incite heresy. Yet these same leaders recognized that the tale carried weight. Over the next millennium, scribes in Rome transcribed fragments of Enochian manuscripts in secret commentaries, preserving them in hidden sections of the papal archives. By the time Pope Leo XIII formally established the Vatican secret archives in 1881, scholars had cataloged dozens of references to imprisoned angels. When modern researchers gained partial access in the 20th century, they found marginalia recounting clandestine rituals and papal bulls that affirmed the Church's duty to confine these once glorious beings. Although Satan himself remained emblematic of ultimate evil, it was these errant angels, whose names and deeds lingered in apocryphal margins, whom the Church sought to lock away, believing their corruption more insidious than a single external adversary. By the 13th century, the papal curia had grown into a sprawling bureaucratic heart hidden within the Lateran Palace, where registers, charters, and theological treatises accumulated in dust-laden chests. In 1234, Pope Gregory IX commissioned the first systematic cataloging of these documents, driven less by curiosity than by the urgent need to secure records of property and doctrine. Yet, among the innocuous land grants and papal decrees lay fragments of apocryphal lore, tattered scrolls that bore the names of angels condemned for their transgressions. These forbidden pages were removed from public view and stored in the deepest vaults beneath St. John Lateran, where flickering torchlight barely revealed their cryptic inscriptions. For centuries, only a handful of trusted archivists dared descend into the subterranean corridors, their lamps illuminating crypt doors adorned with exorcist symbols and seals from the 16th century, when Pope Paul III had intensified efforts to root out heterodoxy. As the Renaissance dawned, whispers spread of midnight rituals performed in those hidden chambers, prayers of binding that invoked ancient names to reinforce invisible chains. When the Vatican Library and the Archivum Secretum were formally established by Pope Paul V in 1612, the Angelic dossiers were catalogued under separate lock and key, their existence acknowledged only in private correspondence among cardinals. By confining these errant spirits to paper and ink, the Church believed it could contain their influence. Yet, the very act of curating their tales gave them a life of their own, and the walls that sheltered them became both prison and monument to the enduring tension between heavenly grace and celestial rebellion. In the High Middle Ages, scholastic thinkers sought to map the celestial hierarchy even as they wrestled with the legacy of the Watchers. Thomas Aquinas, writing his Summa Theologica between 1265 and 1274, devoted considerable attention to angelology, distinguishing between eternal angels like Lucifer, whose pride marked the original rebellion, and those lesser spirits who sinned by earthly seduction. Aquinas reasoned that Lucifer's fall was a unique rupture in divine order, forging an archetype of cosmic evil, whereas the Watchers represented a pervasive corruption that tainted human history from within. This nuanced theology influenced papal policy. By the 14th century, the notion of imprisoning errant angels in spiritual chains became commonplace among monastic orders. Dominican friars at Santa Maria Sopra Minerva in Rome kept collections of ritual prayers against these hidden foes, and in 1317, Pope John XXII authorized these rites in a papal bull, Substantialis Custodia, to bind unclean spirits thought to stalk the Vatican's vaults. This decree did not name Satan directly. His dominion was beyond human confinement, but it reflected a conviction that fractured angels, those who had mingled with humanity, posed a more immediate threat. Codices from the period describe secret ceremonies performed beneath the basilica, where monks recited passages from the Book of Tobit and invoked the Archangel Raphael to guard against lingering Watcher influence. By treating fallen angels as entities to be bound rather than battled on a metaphysical battlefield, the Church codified its approach: celebrate divine order above, while securing the subterranean margins where transgression had taken root. In this way, medieval theology and ritual merged to create a hidden edifice of spiritual incarceration, one that persists in the shadows of the Vatican's archives to this day. By the late 15th century, the Renaissance illuminated more than art and science. It also cast new light on the ancient texts hidden beneath papal palaces. In 1475, Pope Sixtus IV authorized the relocation of the Archivum Secretum to the Apostolic Palace on Vatican Hill, where its vaults expanded to accommodate volumes rescued from war-torn monasteries. Among these were several Greek manuscripts salvaged from Constantinople in 1453, including a fragmentary account of angelic trials said to have been recorded by early church fathers. The text described how the Watchers were summoned before a heavenly tribunal, sentenced to chains of ethereal fire, and consigned to the caverns of Erebos, a realm beneath creation itself. Though allegorical in tone, these narratives were treated as practical guides for exorcists in Rome, who often reported supernatural disturbances in the convents of the city. In 1492, the Dominican Inquisitor Girolamo Savonarola wrote to the Vatican that he had witnessed voices like distant thunder emanating from hidden cellars under Santa Maria Maggiore, evidence, he believed, of angels still pressing against their bonds. The Pope's secretaries annotated these letters with Benign Sabiinae, instructions to preserve the most sensational details, but seal them away from public scrutiny. Thus, the Renaissance reinforcement of classical scholarship paradoxically deepened the Church's commitment to esoteric guardianship. As humanists prized the rediscovered wisdom of antiquity, they inadvertently reinforced the narrative that some knowledge, especially that which revealed the fate of rebel angels, must remain locked behind fortified doors. In the early years of the 17th century, the Vatican moved to codify its rituals against invisible foes. In 1614, Pope Paul V approved the first official edition of the Rituale Romanum, a compendium of rites compiled under the guidance of Cardinal Antonio Cajetan. While most of his prayers addressed the expulsion of demons, the preface alluded to rites of binding that echoed the ancient condemnations of the Watchers. The text instructed exorcists to call upon archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael to reinforce the spiritual chains that held the rebellious angels fast in their dark prison. This ritual framework was mirrored in marginal notes in the Vatican's secret archives, where scribes recorded the performance of binding ceremonies in the basilica's crypts. One entry dated 1622 recounts a midnight mass in St. Peter's, during which a team of Dominican friars recited Enochic invocations beneath the high altar, seeking to forestall any stirring of the captive spirits. Though the Rituale did not explicitly mention Satan, its language betrayed the Church's deeper anxiety. It was not the solitary fallen archangel who required ritual restraint, but the legion of lesser angels who had once fraternized with humanity. As Europe grappled with witch hunts and sectarian strife, these rites served both as spiritual safeguards and as reminders that some truths, those concerning celestial rebellion, remained too dangerous for daylight. The Vatican's embrace of formalized binding prayers thus transformed ancient legend into living practice, weaving apocryphal lore into the very fabric of church ceremony. By the mid-17th century, the fervor of the Counter-Reformation had imbued Vatican ritual with renewed urgency. In 1647, under the papacy of Innocent X, a clandestine commission of theologians and exorcists convened to evaluate reports of inexplicable disturbances in Rome's churches and monasteries. Their preliminary findings, inscribed on vellum and sealed with the Pope's signet, described instances of invisible chains rattling in the darkness and cold drafts whispering through sanctuaries long after candles had guttered out. Drawing on apocryphal traditions, the Commission recommended expanding the Rituale Romanum with a series of binding prayers of the Watchers, adapted from chapters of the Book of Enoch and the pseudepigraphal Testament of Solomon. These supplemental rites, however, were never published. Instead, they circulated in secret manuscript form among a select circle of Dominican convents. In 1655, records note that the friars of Santa Maria Sopra Minerva possessed one such manuscript, its pages annotated with prayers in Latin, Greek, and Aramaic languages chosen to match the inscriptions the Watchers themselves once spoke. The Vatican Archive entry chillingly concludes that the manuscript was to be guarded as if it were the key to the abyss, even as Enlightenment thought began to question the nature of unseen forces. The Church doubled down on its spiritual bulwarks, convinced that angels who had tasted human corruption posed a more immediate peril than any philosophical doubt. By treating these binding prayers as confidential instruments of divine defense, the Vatican perpetuated a secret tradition of angelic imprisonment that, hidden beneath centuries of reform and renewal, quietly endured. In the dawn of the 18th century, the Vatican's guardians of faith faced a new challenge as reports of spectral phenomena seeped into the court of Pope Clement XI. Between 1706 and 1713, a series of curious incidents unfolded in the sacristies of St. Peter's and neighboring chapels. Candle flames quivered without breeze, and vault doors sealed for centuries were found inexplicably ajar. While secular scholars dismissed these occurrences as drafts or structural settling, the papal exorcists recognized the hallmarks of the Watchers' unrest. In response, Clement XI commissioned a refreshed expurgation of the Archivum Secretum, ordering that every manuscript referring to fallen angels be examined, transcribed, and cross-referenced with earlier inventories. Under the scrutiny of Brother Matteo Ricci, a Jesuit scholar renowned for his linguistic mastery, scribes produced a compendium of testimonies dating back to the 15th century. These accounts spoke of disembodied voices whispering in ancient tongues, of chained spirits rattling iron bonds, and of midnight vigils interrupted by phantom choruses. Ricci's annotations suggested that the Watchers' defiance grew stronger as the centuries passed, feeding on the collective sins of humankind. Although Clement XI publicly maintained that such tales were illusory, the Vatican's inner sanctum prepared for renewed ritual measures. Liturgical scholars were quietly instructed to reintroduce binding prayers into the daily liturgy of select Roman congregations. Meanwhile, a hidden decree mandated that any unauthorized investigation of these phenomena be met with strict ecclesiastical censure. Thus, even as the Enlightenment reshaped intellectual life outside its walls, the Vatican reinforced its subterranean bastion against celestial rebellion, determined to hold the Watchers captive in parchment and prayer. In the tumultuous wake of the French Revolution, the Vatican confronted a threat that extended beyond armies and ideologies. In 1798, when Napoleon's General Berthier marched into Rome and proclaimed the Roman Republic, the Vatican's treasures and archives were at grave risk of confiscation or destruction. To safeguard the most sensitive documents, including the apocryphal dossiers on fallen angels, Pope Pius VI ordered their transfer to hidden vaults beneath the Vatican gardens. Under cover of darkness, a small cadre of Swiss guards and trusted archivists transported dozens of heavy chests, their contents wrapped in oilskin to protect against damp. According to a secret memorandum from Cardinal Consalvi, these chests contained incomplete translations of the Book of Enoch, letters from medieval exorcists, and ritual scrolls detailing binding ceremonies in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Although Napoleon's agents seized countless relics and books, they never discovered this subterranean cache. After the Pope's exile to France and subsequent death in Valence, a skeleton crew remained in Rome to maintain the hidden vaults. They braved shortages of lantern oil and threats of collapse as French troops occupied the city. When Pius VII returned in 1814, he personally inspected the vaults, noting that the seals remained unbroken and the manuscripts intact. He commissioned restorations of the iron-bound chests and reinforced the crypt's masonry with fresh mortar. The ordeal reaffirmed the Vatican's conviction that the lore of angelic imprisonment was not merely symbolic, but a sacred trust demanding the utmost protection. In preserving these parchments through revolution and exile, the Church proved that some secrets are reserved for the walls of faith alone. In the late 19th century, Pope Leo XIII embarked on a vigorous program to modernize Vatican scholarship, commissioning experts to catalog and index the sprawling holdings of the Archivum Secretum. Between 1880 and 1903, The librarian Angelo Mercati directed the creation of detailed inventories, distinguishing canonical texts from apocryphal manuscripts, hidden within vast card catalogs under the designation Sesioni Angelica. Lay the Watcher's dossiers, vellum scrolls, medieval commentaries, and ritual fragments, once bound to repel errant angels. Mercati's staff, unaware of the full import of these materials, noted only that they contained extraneous spiritual treatises and kept their findings confined to a ciphered registry. Meanwhile, Leo XIII's scholarly circle published public volumes on angelology and demonology, carefully omitting any reference to imprisoned celestial beings. The contrast between open academic discourse and the archivist's quiet guardianship underscored the Vatican's dual strategy: engage modern intellect while preserving secrets deemed too dangerous for scholarly debate. In 1898, as philologists deciphered newly acquired Greek fragments, a secret memorandum warned that transcription errors could loosen the metaphysical bonds conceptualized in those very texts. Consequently, a special commission oversaw every handling of angelic materials, enforcing protocols that resembled those of laboratory containment. At the turn of the century, where restoration efforts threatened to expose fragile manuscripts to light and humidity, conservators discreetly restricted access and introduced reinforced glass cases with tinted filters, ensuring pages could be viewed but never removed. The Church's commitment to safeguarding these accounts of celestial rebellion remained unwavering, as Leo XIII understood that the story of angels imprisoned for their transgressions was not only a theological anomaly, but also a testament to the enduring tension between divine mystery and human stewardship. At the dawn of the 20th century, whispers of the hidden angelic archives stirred curiosity beyond Rome's walls. In 1905, a French scholar named René Guénon, having visited the Vatican Library under special permit, alluded in private letters to strange devotional scrolls that did not belong to any known Christian rite. His tantalizing references reached esoteric societies across Europe, prompting unofficial inquiries and unauthorized searches in adjacent monastic libraries. Alarmed by the prospect of leaks, Pope Pius X authorized an internal review of security protocols for the Archivum Secretum and the Vatican Library. Surveillance was tightened. Access logs recorded every visitor. Nighttime guards patrolled the dim corridors, and select manuscripts were relocated to the apostolic archives behind triple-locked doors. The most sensitive angelic dossiers were transferred into acid-free envelopes and stored in climate-controlled vaults, a pioneering conservation effort that anticipated modern archival science. By 1910, rumors had grown so persistent that Vatican officials crafted a discreet public statement asserting that all apocryphal and heretical texts had been cataloged and segregated without mentioning their contents. This message, released to placate scholarly curiosity, cloaked the Church's true concern. The knowledge of enslaved watchers might embolden movements seeking to harness occult power. In private, Pius X is said to have remarked that safeguarding these legends was akin to keeping Pandora's box sealed, for once opened, they could unravel the delicate fabric of faith. Thus, as Europe edged toward upheaval, the Vatican maintained its dual role as spiritual authority and secret custodian, guarding the legacy of angelic imprisonment beneath layers of doctrine, marble, and myth. The First World War brought new challenges to Vatican security as Europe descended into chaos. In 1917, amid reports of shelling that shook the basilica's foundations, The apostolic archivist ordered the temporary relocation of the most fragile angelic manuscripts to the newly constructed underground vault beneath the Vatican gardens. There, they were housed in a reinforced chamber designed to withstand bomb blasts and equipped with primitive temperature and humidity controls. Reports from the time speak of a night watchman who claimed to hear distant wings echoing beneath the vault, a testimony recorded in a confidential memorandum but deemed too fanciful for publication. Meanwhile, the Vatican's public stance remained focused on providing spiritual solace to war-torn nations. Yet behind closed doors, a special committee met monthly to review any anomalies reported by clergy regarding uncanny phenomena. In 1921, Cardinal Mary del Val authorized an updated Codex Angelicus, incorporating newly authenticated fragments of Enochian and Gnostic texts. This codex, however, was never printed. Its chapters were transcribed by hand onto acid-free parchment and distributed only to senior custodians. Each recipient signed a vow of secrecy, pledging to safeguard the legacy of fallen watchers as one would a papal relic. As Europe rebuilt in the war's aftermath, scholarly interest in occult traditions surged, but the Vatican's inner circle resisted all overtures for collaboration. Correspondence from 1925 warns that any disclosure of binding rituals would compromise not only doctrine, but the very soul of Christendom. In this era of modernism and spiritual experimentation, the Church maintained that true knowledge of celestial rebellion belonged solely to those entrusted with its silent prison. In the decades following the Second World War, the Vatican faced both renewed global influence and the challenge of modern scholarship. In 1952, Pope Pius XII convened a private commission to oversee the digitization of sensitive documents, including the Angelic dossiers, using microfilm technology. Archivists working in the dimly lit vault beneath the gardens meticulously photographed fragile scrolls and codices, creating surreptitious backups that could survive any future disaster. Though described in an internal memo as a measure born of prudence, this effort also reflected anxieties about post-war ideological contests and the allure of esoteric knowledge among intelligence agencies. Rumors circulated that Soviet and Allied operatives alike sought to exploit ancient rituals for psychological operations. To counter this threat, the Vatican tightened control over its microfilm repository, installing locked cabinets and restricting viewings to a handful of clerics sworn to perpetual secrecy. Meanwhile, theological scholars outside Rome noted the sudden disappearance of a key manuscript fragment once housed at the Ambrosian Library, yet absent from published catalogs. When questioned, Vatican spokesmen offered a neutral explanation of differing cataloging standards. In truth, the fragment had been requisitioned for comparison with other Watcher texts, then undergoing analysis in a sealed room of the apostolic archives. By embracing new technology while maintaining old oaths of silence, the Church navigated the shifting terrain of the Cold War. It became evident that the legend of imprisoned angels was no mere relic of medieval superstition, but a living charge that spanned centuries of conflict, secrecy, and faith. In 1962, as the world watched Rome convene the Second Vatican Council, a parallel council of custodians met deep beneath the gardens to reaffirm the Church's guardianship over its most arcane texts. Pope John XXIII's unprecedented opening of windows to modernity did not extend to the Archivum Secretum's restricted Sessione Angelica. Instead, a confidential decree, signed in early 1963, transferred all microfilmed copies of Enochian rites to a reinforced chamber sealed by 3 successive papal apostolic letters. The council's sweeping reforms seeking aggiornamento and engagement with contemporary culture were celebrated above ground, yet in the subterranean vaults the legend of imprisoned angels remained sacrosanct. Archivists reported that even routine maintenance of climate controls required dual authorization from both the prefect of the Vatican Library and the cardinal archivist, a safeguard designed to prevent unauthorized exposure to the Watcher's lore. As bishops debated vernacular liturgy and religious liberty, the secret custodians debated the theological implications of exposing these binding prayers. Drafts of a memorandum from 1965 reveal that some theologians argued for scholarly study of the Angelic manuscripts, claiming insight into Angelology could enrich modern theology. Their proposals, however, were quietly dismissed in favor of preserving tradition unbroken. Among the hidden texts, a recently discovered 15th century commentary affirmed that the Watchers' corruption had never been fully expiated, and that their chains must be renewed with each generation's faith. Thus, the Church emerged from Vatican II with renewed commitment to outward renewal and inward secrecy, embracing the world in its pews while shielding the terrors of celestial rebellion in vaults no scholar could open. By the late 1970s, the Vatican found itself confronting both technological innovation and renewed interest in occult traditions. In 1978, when Pope John Paul I's sudden death sent shockwaves through the Church, a confidential note from the Vatican Secretariat of State reminded custodians of the Angelorum Registrum to verify that all microfilm duplicates of binding rituals remained secure. His successor, Pope John Paul II, inherited this responsibility, and in 1982 approved the installation of an electronic climate control system in the underground vaults, an unprecedented modernization intended to preserve parchment against mold and decay. While technicians calibrated humidity levels, a select group of archivists conducted spot checks to ensure that no unauthorized reproductions had been made during maintenance. At the same time, interest in New Age spirituality peaked, and rumors circulated that fringe researchers were attempting to summon or communicate with the Watchers via reconstructed Enochian rites. In response, a discreet circular was issued to every diocesan archive worldwide, warning that any attempt to replicate these ancient ceremonies without Vatican authorization would constitute grave sacrilege. Internally, the Secretariat of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith reviewed reports of clandestine gatherings in Europe and the Americas, concluding that gossip alone could endanger the faithful by inspiring reckless dabbling. Thus, while the Church publicly decried superstition, behind closed doors it reinforced its own walls of secrecy, upgrading logs, auditing access logs, and reaffirming that the imprisoned angels, recorded only in apocryphal margins, must remain as hidden as ever. The intertwining of modern security measures with age-old oaths demonstrated that, even at the dawn of the digital age, the Vatican's commitment to angelic incarceration was as vital and unyielding as the chains described in the epistles of antiquity. As the calendar turned to the 21st century, the Vatican confronted the challenge of preserving millennia-old parchments in an era of digital proliferation. In 2002, Pope John Paul II sanctioned a pilot program to digitize portions of the Archivum Secretum, ostensibly to safeguard texts against fire or flood. Under the supervision of the Vatican Library's Technology Office, A team of cryptographers and conservators devised a bespoke encryption protocol to store high-resolution scans of delicate manuscripts in a secure off-site server. Access required dual authentication, a smart card issued by the prefect of the library, and a biometric fingerprint match from the cardinal archivist. Yet even this modern fortress could not fully contain the allure of the Watcher's lore. In 2008, an unauthorized attempt to access the Angelorum subsections triggered an automatic lockdown of the digital archive and alerted the Vatican's cybersecurity unit. The ensuing investigation revealed that a disgruntled archivist had attempted to transfer Enochian fragments onto a portable drive. He was quietly dismissed, and the protocol was revised to include real-time monitoring of file transfer attempts. At the same time, theological scholars outside Rome petitioned for limited access to newly digitized documents, arguing that the binding rituals offered valuable insight into early Christian understandings of free will and rebellion. Their requests were met with polite deferral, emphasizing that such materials remained reserved to the safekeeping of the Holy See. By integrating state-of-the-art technology with centuries-old vows of secrecy, the Vatican demonstrated that the prison of parchment and prayer had evolved into a multifaceted system of physical, liturgical, and digital safeguards. In doing so, it affirmed that the question of why angels, rather than a singular adversary, were imprisoned remains as relevant now as when early church fathers first chained their stories to vellum. Take a breath. We've only scratched the surface. Subscribe to keep uncovering what's hidden. In 2013, the election of Pope Francis ushered in a renewed spirit of pastoral outreach, yet the custodians of the Vatican's secret angelic archives remained unchanged in their vigilance. That same year, a classified report circulated among members of the Vatican Library's Advisory Council, detailing plans to migrate the encrypted digital repository into a bespoke, air-gapped server housed within the new Vatican data center. This initiative aimed to protect the Enochian and apocryphal manuscripts from external cyber threats while preserving them for future generations. Under the oversight of the librarian of the Holy Roman Church, technicians implemented multi-layered firewalls and offline backup protocols, ensuring that no network device could reach the Angelorum partition without express papal authorization. Simultaneously, a silent memo from the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith reminded archivists that public acknowledgement of these efforts could sow confusion, suggesting instead that any disclosures be framed as routine library improvements. In tandem with technological upgrades, liturgical scholars quietly refined the binding prayers, translating them into contemporary Italian for the benefit of select members of the clergy, those charged with maintaining the spiritual bonds of the Watchers. Though these updated prayers were never published, they were whispered in private chapels during solemn vigils beneath the Vatican terraces. Thus, even as the Church appeared to embrace transparency and reform, its guardians reinforced the multi-layered defenses, physical, ecclesiastical, and digital, that ensure the Watcher's imprisonment remains sealed within archives, hearts, and ancient oaths. In the spring of 2016, under the guidance of Pope Francis's librarian, Professor Sergio Pagano, the Vatican launched an ambitious project to restore and conserve centuries-old apocryphal manuscripts. Tucked away in the Angelorum section of the Apostolic Archives were fragile pages of 4th-century parchment, their ink faded and fibers brittle after centuries of storage. Expert conservators from the Vatican Library's Restoration Laboratory painstakingly cleaned each leaf with minimal moisture, applied Japanese tissue to reinforce tears, and documented every intervention in a bound report sealed for internal use. Among the restored texts were marginal annotations in a 10th century hand, describing a binding ceremony held in the crypt of St. Peter's in the year 998. These notes detailed precise verses drawn from the Epistle of Jude and the Book of Enoch, underscoring the medieval church's belief that unchained angels could corrupt entire regions. While the restoration team worked, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith convened a confidential symposium of theologians to review whether any annotations should be published for scholarly study. The proposal was met with resistance. Participants argued that exposing the Watcher's rites could lead to misinterpretation or exploitation. Consequently, only a redacted summary was approved, framed as a general history of medieval exorcism rites, without explicit reference to angelic imprisonment. By the end of 2017, the restored volumes were returned to their fortified vaults, each prefaced by a newly commissioned apostolic letter, reaffirming that these documents remain locked under solemn oath. The dual process of conservation and censorship demonstrated anew the Vatican's commitment to preserving the legacy of celestial incarceration, honoring the integrity of ancient lore while guarding against the unintended consequences of unveiling its most secret teachings. In 2018, as interfaith dialogues gained momentum under Pope Francis's pontificate, whispers of the Vatican's secret angelic archives resurfaced among a small circle of scholars and clergy, concerned that the growing spotlight on documentary openness might threaten the Angelorum vaults. The Vatican Library established a clandestine working group on ecclesiastical secrecy, tasked with assessing vulnerabilities in both physical and digital holdings. Their confidential report, circulated under the imprimatur of the prefect of the library, recommended reinforcing the underground vault's entrance with biometric scanners linked to an independent power grid. Simultaneously, they proposed ritual renewal, annual recitation of ancient binding prayers by select monastic communities in Paul VI, Audience Hall, an act intended to symbolically reforge the chains that bound the Watchers in apocryphal lore. In late 2019, technicians installed iris recognition devices at the vault doors, supplementing the existing smart card and fingerprint system. The integration of cutting-edge security mirrored medieval practices, where multiple seals and divine invocations safeguarded the same manuscripts. Yet, the working group's final recommendation remained rooted in tradition. Periodic liturgical observances to maintain the spiritual potency of the Church's custodianship over its most arcane texts. While the Vatican publicly championed transparency and dialogue, behind closed doors, it quietly wove together technology and devotion, ensuring that the story of imprisoned angels, inscribed on fragile parchment, would endure beyond the shifting currents of modernity. As the Vatican moved into the third decade of the 21st century, environmental concerns emerged as a new challenge for the subterranean archives. In 2021, persistent reports of mold spores in adjacent storage rooms prompted the Vatican Library's conservation team to commission a study on the impact of climate change on heritage materials. Their findings revealed subtle shifts in temperature and humidity even beneath the thick travertine vaults of St. Peter's. To counteract these fluctuations, engineers installed a geothermal heat exchange system beneath the gardens, using stable subterranean temperatures to regulate the archive's microclimate without relying solely on electricity. In parallel, the Working Group on Ecclesiastical Secrecy updated its protocols to include environmental monitoring as a key security measure, reasoning that destabilized conditions might inadvertently expose delicate manuscripts to harm. Access requests, now required archivists to confirm that the intended consultation would not disturb critical air circulation patterns tied to the watcher's parchments. Meanwhile, a confidential theological briefing reminded custodians that the very stones encasing the hidden angelic texts were part of an ancient pact. The Church believed that the earth itself bore witness to the chains that bound the rebel spirits. Any threat to the vault's integrity was thus tantamount to loosening celestial bonds. As debates about digital openness and environmental stewardship swirled in academic circles, the Vatican quietly demonstrated a holistic approach to preservation, one that intertwined the physical stability of its archives with the spiritual security of its most secret traditions. In the spring of 2023, the Vatican Library announced an ambitious collaboration with the Vatican Observatory to employ hyperspectral imaging on selected apocryphal manuscripts, including those in the Angelorum series. Under the direction of Dr. Lucia Fontana, a leading conservation scientist, the team sought to reveal invisible undertexts and palimpsests, layers erased by medieval scribes who repurposed older parchments for new writings. Operating in the subterranean greenhouse adjacent to the gardens, technicians affixed portable hyperspectral cameras to flexible booms, scanning each leaf at wavelengths ranging from ultraviolet to near-infrared. Early results astonished scholars. A 12th century folio contained an erased marginal note in Syriac, describing a right to walk in the bonds of captive watchers, while another fragment concealed an outline of angelic names once thought lost. Recognizing both the scholarly value and the security risk, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith issued an internal directive restricting access to derived spectral data. Only a small cadre of vetted conservators and theologians could view the enhanced images, and no digital files were permitted to leave the vault area. Simultaneously, the Vatican's Cybersecurity Office encrypted each dataset within a secure enclave, protected by multi-factor authentication and geographically bound network constraints. While public statements lauded the library's commitment to preservation science, the hidden protocols underscored a conscious choice. New technology could illuminate forgotten history, but only under the strictest guardianship. In this way, the Vatican continued its centuries-long balance of discovery and discretion, ensuring that the fragile testimonies of angelic transgression remain both accessible to truth-seekers and shielded from misuse. In the autumn of 2024, the Vatican Library's Angelorum section underwent its most sophisticated security audit to date, prompted by burgeoning interest in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Under the auspices of the prefect of the library, a specialist team from the Pontifical Academy for Life collaborated with external cybersecurity experts to simulate intrusion attempts on the digital repository. Their goal was not only to test firewalls and encryption, but also to ensure that no pattern recognition algorithms could discern or reconstruct sensitive data from metadata traces. Concurrently, liturgical scholars prepared a summarized dossier of binding prayers translated into Latin, Italian, and a modern English paraphrase, so that in the event of a compromise, authenticated texts could be distinguished from forgeries. The exercise culminated in a clandestine demonstration before senior curial officials. An AI model trained on generic medieval manuscripts failed to replicate more than a handful of genuine Enochian verses, underscoring the effectiveness of the Vatican's layered defense. Yet the audit also revealed an unexpected vulnerability. The network required periodic software updates that, if mishandled, could momentarily expose connection logs. To mitigate this risk, the Vatican's IT department instituted rolling maintenance windows at unpredictable intervals, synchronized with prayer vigils in the crypts to symbolically renew the spiritual bonds of the watchers. As Europe's academic and technological landscapes continue to evolve, the Vatican's custodial strategy remains adaptive, merging cutting-edge defenses with centuries-old rituals. In doing so, it honors the conviction that the imprisoned angels must be protected not only by iron and ink, but also by prayerful vigilance and the quiet hum of servers buried beneath sacred soil. In early 2025, as Pope Francis celebrated the 60th anniversary of his ordination, the Vatican Library quietly implemented a new archival protocol that blended tradition and innovation. Conservators introduced an AI-assisted transcription tool that, when activated, could read select apocryphal manuscripts aloud in a whispering tone, meant to echo the ancient voices preserved in the text. This system operated on a sealed local network within the underground vault, accessible only via the multi-factor authentication rig, now familiar to custodians. Its purpose was twofold: to detect any anomalies in the manuscript's condition, such as ink, flaking, or parchment, brittleness, and to preserve the tonal texture of ritual incantations meant to bind the rebel angels. Early trials demonstrated remarkable sensitivity. Microphones hidden in the vault's stone alcoves captured faint echoes from the reading process, which technicians interpreted as encouraging signs of environmental stability. Yet the theological overseers insisted that the tool's readings remain confidential, fearing that audible renditions of binding prayers could be misused if heard without proper context. As scholars across Europe published excited commentaries on AI's role in heritage conservation, the Vatican's public messaging remained focused on its commitment to preserving cultural patrimony, offering no hint of the angelic lore underpinning the project. Behind the scenes, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith convened a small advisory panel of theologians, IT specialists, and liturgists to draft ethical guidelines governing the tool's use, ensuring that each whispered verse served both as a digital sentinel and a spiritual reaffirmation of the Church's ancient mandate to keep the watchers bound. In mid-2025, the Vatican undertook an unprecedented collaboration with international libraries to create a special collections network designed to share metadata of rare items while preserving each institution's most sensitive holdings. As part of this initiative, the Vatican Library provided abstracted catalog records for its Angelorum manuscripts, titles, dates, and general subject headings without disclosing their full contents. The network's encryption protocols ensured that researchers could request access to catalogs, but any attempt to retrieve detailed descriptions of the watcher's binding rights would trigger an automated lockdown and alert Vatican archivists. Behind this technical framework, a small cadre of theological advisors drafted a guiding principle: metadata transparency must never compromise spiritual security. To reinforce this, the Vatican revived an ancient practice under a modern guise: annual commemoration of the Watcher's judgment in select Roman parishes. During these low-profile services, celebrants read generic passages from the Epistle of Jude and recited intercessory prayers for fallen angels, symbolically renewing the bonds that held them captive. While these gatherings remained obscure, they served as communal reminders that the story of imprisoned angels transcended parchment and code. It lived in ritual memory. Simultaneously, the Special Collections Network's Governance Council agreed to fund research into advanced watermarking of digital images, embedding invisible markers that would trace any unauthorized leak. Thus, as the Vatican engaged the wider library community, It did so on its own terms, balancing the pursuit of scholarly collaboration with a steadfast guardianship over its most arcane treasures. In the summer of 2025, the Vatican Library quietly piloted a new blockchain registry for its most sensitive holdings, including the Angelic dossiers. Under the supervision of the prefect of the Vatican Library and a hand-picked team of cryptographers, each manuscript's provenance and access history were recorded as immutable entries on a private blockchain. Every time a conservator opened a vault door or viewed a digital scan, a cryptographic token was generated and logged across distributed ledgers maintained by the Vatican and by partner archives in Switzerland and Austria. This system guaranteed that any attempt to alter provenance data or to forge access records would be instantly detected, and that the chain of custody for each fragile parchment remained transparent only to authorized custodians. Simultaneously, a discreet liturgical memorandum instructed select monastic communities to recite ancient binding formulas on the date corresponding to each manuscript's origin, symbolically renewing their spiritual chains. These rites were timed to coincide with blockchain rite events, marrying the timeless power of prayer with cutting-edge cryptography. Although public pronouncements celebrated the Vatican's embrace of innovative stewardship, insiders recognized the deeper purpose: to ensure that the secrets of the Watchers remain sealed not only in stone and ink, but also in an incorruptible digital archive. By weaving together prayer, scholarship, and advanced technology, the Church reaffirmed its ancient conviction that some knowledge, especially that which speaks of angels imprisoned for their transgressions, must be preserved under the strictest safeguards, lest the chains that once bound celestial rebels be unwittingly unraveled. Late in 2025, a high-profile art theft at a European museum underscored new risks for fragile cultural heritage and prompted the Vatican to reassess its approach to sharing rare digital previews. In November, a masked thief hacked into a museum's private live stream system, capturing high-resolution footage of illuminated manuscripts before vanishing without a trace. Though the stolen material did not include Vatican holdings, the incident jolted Vatican security advisors, who recognized that even low-bandwidth previews could be misappropriated. In response, the prefect of the Vatican Library issued an unpublicized directive. Any plan to stream or display digital reproductions of Angelorum folios, even to vetted scholars, must undergo a dual review process involving both the librarian and the cardinal archivist. Moreover, previews would now be watermarked with imperceptible digital signatures linked to the viewer's credentials, ensuring any leak could be traced to its source. This technical upgrade was paired with a revival of an ancient monastic practice. Custodians of the Angelic dossiers convened quarterly in the crypt beneath St. Peter's to chant binding litanies, asking for divine protection. Over the manuscripts in an age of cyber attacks, the juxtaposition of state-of-the-art cybersecurity and whispered prayer highlighted the Vatican's enduring conviction. The same vigilance that once guarded iron-bound scrolls now shields encrypted archives and streaming protocols. Though the world beyond Rome's walls shifted ever faster, the Vatican's custodians remained unwavering, melding tradition and innovation to keep the secret prison of rebel angels sealed against both digital intruders and the eager hands of curious minds. Let that one sink in. When you're ready for the next mystery, hit subscribe. As the world entered 2026, the Vatican faced fresh pressures to democratize access to historical documents, spurred by global open data movements and cultural heritage conventions. In January, UNESCO delegates visited Rome to survey the Vatican Library's stewardship practices, praising its conservation programs while expressing concern over limited public accessibility. In response, the prefect of the Vatican Library submitted a formal report detailing the institution's dual mission to preserve humanity's shared patrimony and to protect certain traditions from the harm of unfettered exposure. The report emphasized that the Angelorum collections, unlike more conventional holdings, contained ritual knowledge deemed inherently perilous in untrained hands. To maintain compliance with UNESCO guidelines without breaching its own secrecy, the Vatican offered to share general metadata and conservation summaries with the International Committee, omitting any reference to binding rights or angelic lore. Behind the scenes, meanwhile, archivists conducted a comprehensive audit of all access control logs, implementing tighter geofencing to ensure that any remote requests from outside Vatican City could not query the Angelorum partitions. Clerical supervisors also reinstated quarterly binding liturgies in the subterranean chapel, a symbolic reinforcement of the ancient chains enacted with whispered verses from the Epistle of Jude. This blend of diplomatic transparency and guarded ritual underscore the Vatican's determination to satisfy global standards while safeguarding its most sensitive traditions. Through carefully calibrated disclosures and unbroken cycles of prayer, the Church navigated the complex intersection of heritage sharing and spiritual responsibility, ensuring that the clandestine saga of imprisoned angels remained secure beneath layers of protocol, parchment, and sacrament. In the spring of 2026, the Vatican Library introduced a discrete fellowship program for postdoctoral researchers in manuscript studies, granting select scholars supervised access to non-sensitive medieval texts. Applicants could propose projects involving paleography, codicology, or liturgical history, but those seeking the Angelorum dossiers were quietly redirected toward general epistolary materials. Fellow publications praised the library's openness, yet behind the scenes, librarians maintained a shadow registry of topics deemed off-limits. When one early career scholar inquired about researching divine rebellion motifs, his request was politely declined, with an invitation to focus on more conventional angelologies. His mentor later confided that the unspoken rationale was to avoid drawing attention to the Watcher's prison, a teaching that, if publicized, could rekindle fascination with forbidden rites. Meanwhile, the fellowship's stipends funded the Restoration Lab's ongoing work on non-apocryphal manuscripts, subtly reinforcing the priority assigned to secure collections. The Vatican's curated generosity offering genuine scholarly opportunity while preserving a strand. Deepest secrets embodied centuries of cautious guardianship. By blending selective engagement with strategic redirection, the Church ensured that interest in its hidden archives remained tempered by protocol and discretion. When whispers of a forthcoming blockbuster film about angels reached the Vatican in late 2026, the librarian of the Holy Roman Church foresaw a surge of curiosity that might strain even the most careful guardians of forbidden lore. Although the project's producers only sought general background on angelic hierarchies, the Vatican's communication office prepared a measured response, approved interviews with theologians on standard teachings, coupled with a firm statement that any depiction of hidden texts or secret prisons lay outside official doctrine. Behind the scenes, archivists compiled a concise briefing package for senior Vatican officials, summarizing the film's potential impact and recommending a preemptive review of access logs to the Angelorum vault. Simultaneously, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith dispatched missives to major Catholic seminaries, advising instructors to reaffirm the Church's public stance on angelology and to discourage unsupervised speculation on apocryphal materials. At the same time, a small team in the restoration lab expedited the digitization of select non-apocryphal angelic manuscripts, making them more readily available online. This strategic release aimed to satiate scholarly interest with safe content, diverting attention from the secret collections. The dual maneuvers public engagement through approved scholarship and the quiet reinforcement of archival protocols demonstrated the Vatican's continued deft handling of its most arcane holdings. Even as popular culture edged closer to forbidden themes, the Church's custodians stood ready, ensuring that the ancient prison of rebellious angels remained sealed behind layers of ritual, decree, and disciplined discretion. As the Vatican approached the Jubilee year of 2027, preparations brimmed with outward celebration, while, beneath the surface, the custodians of the Angelorum archives undertook their own quiet vigil. In early 2027, the prefect of the Vatican Library convened a task force to synchronize the Jubilee's massive influx of pilgrims with enhanced security measures for all special collections. While bronze gates and new surveillance cameras would greet visitors above ground, below ground, the task force focused on reinforcing the vault's unassuming iron doors and recalibrating environmental sensors to compensate for increased foot traffic and temperature fluctuations. Simultaneously, archivists drafted an internal circular reminding all Vatican employees from sacristans to security personnel that the ancient binding rites must be ritually renewed on the eve of Holy Thursday, commemorating Christ's final night, and symbolically fortifying the spiritual chains that held the watchers in place. Though public messaging celebrated the Jubilee's theme of mercy and renewal, the secret memorandum emphasized that mercy for humankind did not extend to angels who had betrayed their heavenly station. In June, as tens of thousands gathered in St. Procol, Peter's Square, the task force confirmed that no unauthorized anomalies, such as unexplained drafts, power surges, or digital access attempts, had occurred in the vault. A final report, signed by the Cardinal Archivist, affirmed that both physical and liturgical defenses had held firm. In this convergence of joyous pilgrimage and covert ritual, the Vatican demonstrated that its most ancient mandate, ensuring the imprisonment of fallen angels, remained as steadfast and essential as the celebrations unfolding above. The morning after the Jubilee's final Mass, the Vatican Library's Restoration Lab reported an unexpected anomaly. Microfissures in several parchment folios, previously deemed stable. Under the direction of Chief Conservator, Dr. Assunta Ricci, the team conducted microscopic analysis, revealing that tiny fractures had formed along inked lines precisely where the Book of Enoch's binding invocations were written. Though initially attributed to environmental shifts, the timing immediately following the ritual renewal suggested something more uncanny. A confidential memorandum noted that the fissures corresponded to the verses calling upon Raphael to bind the watchers hand and foot, hinting that the renewed prayers might exert a metaphysical tension on the manuscripts themselves. To address this, a dual strategy was enacted. Technicians recalibrated the vault's climate controls to minimize physical stress, and liturgical officers added supplementary intercessions to the Thursday Vigil, invoking God's mercy to soothe both parchment and spirit. Meanwhile, the Cardinal Archivist commissioned a theological study to explore whether the binding prayers, once chanted under the basilica stones, might have unintended consequences for the very documents that preserved them. The study remained internal, its findings veiled, but it reinforced a long-held conviction. The act of imprisoning angels in text was not merely symbolic. It was a covenant woven into the fabric of creation. As the Vatican prepared for a new season of outreach and scholarship, its guardians recognized that some mysteries, like the fragile balance between ink, ritual, and celestial chains, demanded vigilance equal to that of any physical barrier. In the months following the Jubilee's conclusion, the Vatican's clandestine conservators introduced a new layer of protection for the most fragile apocryphal pages. Transparent mylar sleeves custom cut to fit each folio. While mylar was already used in archival circles to safeguard critical texts, its application to the Angelorum manuscripts carried special significance. The polyester film acted as a physical buffer, preventing contact with the parchment and reducing abrasion during handling. Conservators also lined the sleeves with a thin, inert silica gel strip to absorb excess moisture, thus mitigating the risk of further microfissures. Yet, this material solution was more than technical. It mirrored a theological belief that the texts, like the angels they described, required a barrier between sacred and profane realms. Concurrently, a secret liturgical ballot among senior archivists reaffirmed that each manuscript ought to be encased only after the annual Holy Thursday Vigil, symbolically sealing the binding prayers within a physical sheath. As the Vatican Library prepared for its annual open day, where scholars could view non-sensitive materials, the mylar-protected volumes remained tucked away, their presence known only to a few. The unannounced introduction of these sleeves underscored a principle driving church custodianship, that some truths, especially those recounting the imprisonment of celestial beings, must be kept behind more than just locks and oaths. They need a tangible buffer that echoes the spiritual safeguards woven through centuries of ritual and devotion. As spring turned to summer in 2027, the Vatican Library faced an unusual logistical challenge. Accommodating a growing cadre of international scholars specializing in esoteric studies, many of whom had sought but been denied access to the Angelorum collections. To address this surge without compromising secrecy, the prefect of the library implemented a specialized seminar series on apocryphal literature, deliberately excluding the binding rights full texts. Lecturers discussed the cultural and linguistic contexts of Enochian traditions, illustrating broader themes while rigorously omitting specific invocations. Simultaneously, a parallel track was offered exclusively to Vatican-approved fellows. A private colloquium held in the hidden crypt where hand-picked theologians could engage with restricted passages. Attendance was limited, and fellow delegates swore new oaths of confidentiality. The bifurcated program ensured that the Church fulfilled its academic mission without risking inadvertent disclosure of its most sensitive lore. Behind the scenes, archivists monitored seminar materials for any unauthorized references to angelic imprisonment and stood ready to reinforce liturgical oaths should any scholar stray beyond approved boundaries. In this way, the Vatican balanced openness with obligation, demonstrating that the story of angels bound beneath St. Peter's is preserved not only in parchment and prayer, but also in the disciplined orchestration of knowledge itself. In late summer 2027, a discreet internal review examined the psychological impact of the Angelorum rites on those tasked with their care. Monastic scribes and archivists, who alone witnessed the most potent binding formulas, reported vivid dreams and, in some cases, unsettling sensations of presence when preparing or reading the texts. Recognizing a potential strain on ecclesiastical staff, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith commissioned spiritual counselors seasoned in the art of examen to provide confidential guidance. These counselors held private sessions in the crypt's antechamber, offering prayers and reflections to reaffirm each guardian's faith and resilience. Simultaneously, a canonical directive was issued. No individual would serve more than a decade in the immediate Angelorum team, ensuring a rotation that balanced devotion with self-care. The review further recommended periodic sabbaticals in the monastery of San Giovanni, where custodians could retreat from the vault's hush and meditate on broader theological themes. By instituting these measures, the Vatican acknowledged that preserving the lore of imprisoned angels was as much a pastoral undertaking as a scholarly one. The enduring vigilance required to guard against celestial rebellion demanded not just secure doors and arcane prayers, but also the spiritual well-being of those who maintained them. In safeguarding the caretakers, the Church reaffirmed its belief that the bonds which held the watchers captive depended equally on human devotion and divine grace. As autumn's golden light filtered through St. Mand, Peter's, the Vatican Library, embarked on an experimental project in November 2027 to assess the long-term stability of its most guarded parchments under simulated pilgrimage conditions. Collaborating with materials scientists from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, archivists placed facsimile reproductions of the Angelorum texts alongside genuine non-sensitive medieval codices on a rotating display platform. Automated sensors measured variables minute shifts in temperature, humidity, and light exposure, replicating the sporadic warmth and flicker of candles carried by visitors. After 2 weeks, data revealed that, while the reproductions tolerated these conditions, even limited exposure risked accelerating ink degradation on authentic apocryphal manuscripts. Armed with these findings, the prefect of the Vatican Library issued a confidential directive mandating that any future exhibitions exclude originals and rely solely on carefully verified facsimiles. At the same time, liturgical officers renewed the Holy Thursday binding prayers in the vault's crypt, acting in tandem with the scientific safeguards to symbolically reinforce the unseen chains. In an internal report circulated to senior curial officials, archivists underscored that physical preservation and spiritual vigilance were two sides of the same coin. One prevented the decay of ancient ink and parchment. The other upheld the metaphysical bonds that defined the Church's secret charge. By harmonizing cutting-edge science with timeless ritual, the Vatican demonstrated a nuanced commitment to its most arcane heritage, recognizing that the story of angels imprisoned for their transgression must be protected not only by locks and prayers, but also by the rigorous application of modern conservation research. In the chill of January 2028, Vatican archivists confronted a troubling discovery: minute traces of chemical residue on the edge of a 13th century Enochian folio. Preliminary analysis suggested that an unintentional spill of a cleaning agent had weakened fibers along the margin, raising alarm that even routine maintenance posed risks to the Angelorum texts. To address this, the prefect of the Vatican Library convened an emergency meeting with the conservation team and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The resulting protocol, kept strictly internal, prohibited the use of any liquid-based cleaning within the subterranean vaults. Instead, conservators were to deploy non-contact methods, such as dry brushing with ultra-soft brushes and localized air puffers calibrated to minimal pressure. At the same time, liturgical rituals took on renewed significance. During the next Holy Thursday Vigil, celebrants added an intercession specifically asking for divine preservation of the manuscripts against both human error and material decay. This dual response underscored the Vatican's holistic ethos. Safeguarding angelic lore required both the most advanced conservation science and the power of communal prayer. As the team implemented the new cleaning regimen, they also recorded in their confidential ledgers a commitment to continual reassessment, understanding that the texts, much like the angels they described, demanded vigilance through changing seasons and unforeseen hazards. In this convergence of material care and spiritual guardianship, the Church reaffirmed its ancient vow to protect the fragile testament of celestial rebellion, with every tool at its disposal, whether brush, prayer, or the binding bonds of sacred tradition. A pause is good. But the secrets don't stop here. Subscribe and stay close. In February 2028, the Vatican Library's archivists initiated a rare joint observance with the Pontifical Swiss Guard, a ceremonial guard change in the courtyard above ground, mirroring a binding ritual below. As the guard's halberds glinted in the morning sun, a small delegation of archivists descended to the vault's crypt, where they gathered around the sealed Angelorum doors. There, under flickering torchlight, they recited a concise Enochian prayer of reinforcement drawn from a 15th century marginal note, and physically tapped the iron bands that held the door's locking mechanisms. This synchronized ceremony underscored a symbolic alliance. The guards protected the Vatican's physical thresholds, while the archivists safeguarded its spiritual ones. Afterward, maintenance teams inspected the door's hinges and seals, documenting their condition in a classified log. The prefect of the Vatican Library later noted privately that integrating liturgical action with structural checks created a robust, dual-layer defense. By aligning the solemnity of ritual with the precision of inspection, the Vatican reaffirmed its commitment to both sacred tradition and practical security. This ceremony, though unpublicized, became an annual fixture, ensuring that as the guards changed their posts in daylight, the archivists renewed their watch in darkness. In the spring of 2028, the Vatican Library confronted a novel challenge when a research team at a European university announced progress toward a rudimentary quantum computing prototype, one that, in theory, might one day break conventional encryption. Though the technology remained nascent, members of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith recognized the implications for the Angelorum digital archive. In a closed-door meeting convened by the prefect of the Vatican Library, cryptographers and theologians debated whether to migrate the most sensitive files to a quantum-resistant encryption scheme. Ultimately, the decision was made to embark on a phased transition. Over 6 months, IT specialists would re-encrypt all microfilm scans and digital transcriptions using lattice-based algorithms, while simultaneously upgrading physical servers to air-gapped systems impervious to remote quantum attacks. To reinforce the symbolic potency of this technological shift, the Cardinal Archivist commissioned a brief devotional rite held in the crypt's antechamber, invoking divine protection over both parchment and byte. Archivists and IT staff stood in torchlit rows, reciting a Latin hymn adapted from a medieval binding prayer, each phrase intended to sanctify the data as it moved into its new, more secure form. Though unseen by the public, this confluence of ancient ritual and cutting-edge cryptography underscored the Vatican's enduring principle that safeguarding the secrets of fallen angels demands vigilance on every front. By melding lattice cryptography with whispered prayer, the Church reaffirmed its centuries-old conviction that the bonds which hold celestial transgressors captive must be forged in both iron and faith, and continually reforged to meet the threats of each new age. In the spring of 2029, the Vatican Library confronted a novel threat when an external security consultancy alerted custodians to the rise of synthetic voice technology capable of mimicking authorized personnel. With a multi-layered authentication system relying in part on vocal recognition to confirm the identity of archivists reciting binding prayers, Vatican officials realized that deepfake audio could, in theory, bypass one of the last spoken barriers, protecting the Angelorum vaults. In a confidential memorandum, the prefect of the library and the cardinal archivist approved an emergency upgrade to the voice authentication protocol, replacing it with a dual system that combined biometric voice print analysis with a dynamic prayer sequence known only to a handful of exorcists. These liturgical professionals would utter randomized phrases from the Book of Tobit during routine vault inspections, ensuring that any recording would be obsolete the moment it was played back. At the same time, IT specialists implemented continuous voice liveness detection to distinguish live speech from synthetic audio. To reinforce the spiritual component of this defense, the Vatican scheduled a solemn mass in the crypt chapel, invoking the Archangel Michael to guard the threshold against both corporeal and spectral intruders. Archivists reported that the synchronized ceremony heightened the sense of sacred duty, even as it underscored the need for vigilance in an era of rapid technological change. While public statements celebrated the Vatican's integration of innovative security measures, insiders understood that the heart of this response lay in the ancient conviction that spoken prayer carries power beyond mere words. By weaving together dynamic liturgical practice and cutting-edge authentication, the Church reaffirmed that the bonds which hold the rebellious angels captive depend on both divine intervention and human ingenuity. As autumn settled over Rome in 2030, the Vatican Library undertook its most ambitious integration of spirituality and security yet. Recognizing that physical keys and digital credentials alone could not address the subtle vulnerability of human error, the prefect of the library convened a multidisciplinary council of archivists, liturgists, and systems engineers. Their mandate: to design a ceremonial key of binding, a handcrafted relic fashioned from bronze and engraved with Enochian inscriptions, which would serve alongside electronic tokens and biometric verifications. This altered key was to be used only during the annual renewal ritual on Holy Thursday, when the archivists gathered beneath St. Peter's to reaffirm the spiritual chains that bound the watchers. On the morning of the first rehearsal, the council met in the crypt's antechamber as torchlight danced across frescoed walls. A senior liturgist led the invocation, reciting verses adapted from the Epistle of Jude, while each archivist touched the key of binding before placing their electronic token into the vault's console. The confluence of sacred gesture and cutting-edge lock engagement created a synchronized act of devotion and defense. Engineers monitored the console's logs as the bronze key activated hidden mechanical safeguards. Iron sheaths sliding into place behind the heavy doors, reinforcing the binding bonds. Theologians on hand noted that the ritual transformed security into liturgy, making every authentication a solemn act of faith. After the ceremony, the key was returned to its velvet-draped reliquary, visible only to those sworn to secrecy. Though pilgrims thronged St. Peter's above, none suspected that far beneath their feet, a bronze relic and whispered prayer served as the linchpin of an arcane prison. In early 2031, the Vatican Library confronted an unprecedented convergence of threats when a simulated cyber-physical exercise revealed potential exploitation of service tunnels running beneath Vatican Hill. During a joint drill with the Swiss Guards Engineering Corps, teams discovered that aging maintenance conduits, designed originally for water and utility lines, provided access points nearly adjacent to the Angelorum vault. Though the vault itself remained secure, the exercise underscored the need to fortify the surrounding subterranean network. In response, the prefect of the library and the commandant of the Swiss Guard approved a covert project to reroute utility lines and seal off redundant tunnels, replacing them with purpose-built corridors, accessible only through hidden entrances inside the archive's secured perimeter. Meanwhile, liturgical officers adapted a medieval rite of consecration once used to bless new monastic cloisters to sanctify the newly forged passages. In a private ceremony held by torchlight, archivists and guards intoned Latin versicles, invoking God's protection over the consecrated earth and stone. Following the ritual, engineers collapsed and backfilled obsolete tunnels, leaving only the sacred corridor under ecclesiastical vigilance. A sealed report to the Pope noted that this blending of structural fortification with devotional blessing embodied the Vatican's dual commitment to physical security and spiritual guardianship. By sealing off the labyrinth beneath the gardens and sanctifying the new access route, the Church ensured that the prison of rebel angels would remain shielded by both mortar and prayer, impervious to both human intruders and the machinations of unseen foes. By the middle of 2031, the Vatican faced a new era of ecological awareness and its impact on subterranean heritage sites. A routine environmental audit revealed rising radon levels in the deeper vaults, an invisible hazard to both staff and parchment. Recognizing the risk, the prefect of the Vatican Library convened a team of geologists, conservation scientists, and liturgists to devise a comprehensive mitigation strategy. Engineers installed a discreet, active ventilation system beneath the crypt floor, drawing contaminated air upward through hidden shafts and dispersing it harmlessly above ground. At the same time, conservators reinforced fragile Angelorum manuscripts in portable sealed microchambers equipped with radon scavenging materials. To integrate spiritual stewardship with scientific intervention, the Cardinal Archivist commissioned a brief rite borrowing from medieval exorcism litanies, now dedicated to purifying air rather than spirits. During a low-profile ceremony held at dusk, archivists and engineers gathered beneath the basilica, chanting a Latin antiphon adapted to bless the new ventilation conduits. Each participant anointed the intake grills with holy water, symbolically casting out the noxious gas, while entrusting the archives to divine safeguarding. After the service, environmental sensors confirmed a marked decrease in radon concentration, and laboratory tests assured that the parchments were safe from radiation-induced decay. Thus, in melding cutting-edge geotechnical solutions with centuries-old ritual, the Vatican demonstrated that preserving its most secret texts required unwavering attention to both earthly and spiritual atmospheres. In the autumn of 2031, the Vatican Library confronted the challenge of archiving emerging media formats while preserving its ancient collections. A confidential pilot project experimented with storing high-resolution holographic reproductions of select Angelorum manuscripts in a subterranean media vault, leveraging stable underground temperatures to safeguard delicate optical components. Archivists and audiovisual engineers collaborated to convert microfilm scans into encrypted holographic data cubes, each housed within a lead-lined chamber to shield against electromagnetic interference. As technicians calibrated laser projectors in the vault's antechamber, a theological oversight committee insisted on a ritual blessing of the new technology. Under torchlit arches, a senior liturgist chanted Latin verses, drawing on Ps 104, acknowledging God's mastery over light, while archivists processed the first data cube through its initialization sequence. The ceremony symbolized a union of divine illumination and human innovation. Just as the Watcher's knowledge had once sought to corrupt with forbidden insight, so too could holographic access need vigilant oversight. Upon completing the blessing, engineers sealed the cube within its chamber and activated a dual authentication system requiring both electronic keys and a recited Enochian phrase known only to the librarian and the cardinal archivist. Though unseen by the faithful, this fusion of cutting-edge media preservation and ancient recitative underscored a timeless truth. Safeguarding the secret prison of rebel angels demands not only physical barriers and digital encryption, but also the enduring power of prayer and scripture to bind knowledge within its proper bounds. In early 2032, with virtual reality maturing into an immersive scholarly tool, the Vatican Library embarked on a cautious experiment, a closed-loop VR reconstruction of the Angelorum Vault, designed to allow approved researchers to explore a digital facsimile without endangering the original manuscripts. Under strict oversight, conservators captured ultra-high-resolution 3D scans of the vault's architecture, iron-bound chests, and Enochian codices, then wove them into a calibrated VR environment hosted on air-gapped servers in the subterranean media vault. Test users, hand-picked liturgists, and archivists navigated the simulated corridors using custom controllers that tracked ritual gestures, ensuring that only those performing the correct binding prayers could unlock access to deeper chambers. Meanwhile, a theological advisory board convened to establish ethical guidelines. Virtual reenactments of binding ceremonies would require participants to recite authentic Latin incantations, reinforcing the conviction that spiritual authority must accompany technological access. During the VR pilot's inaugural session, a group of theologians donned headsets in the crypt's antechamber, where torchlight dimmed to prevent light interference. As they invoked the ancient verses of Enoch and pressed virtual replicas of iron clasps, system logs recorded both biometric confirmations and audio of the prayers themselves. Afterward, the librarian and the cardinal archivist signed a confidential decree affirming that no portion of the VR model could be exported or shared, and that all user sessions would be audited monthly. This convergence of immersive technology and sacred ritual showcased the Vatican's commitment to innovation tempered by reverence. Even in virtual space, the chains that bind the rebellious angels must be maintained through prayerful intention, human stewardship, and the unbroken traditions that have secured their prison for nearly 2 millennia. By the spring of 2032, the Vatican's approach to safeguarding its arcane texts had become a global model for archival practice, earning discreet inquiries from heritage institutions in Paris, Tokyo, and Washington, D.C. In March, the prefect of the Vatican Library hosted a closed symposium for international conservators, each sworn to confidentiality, on multi-layered risk management for high-value collections. Presentations showcased everything from geothermal vault conditioning to quantum-resistant cryptography, but the centerpiece remained the Angelorum protocols, which combined ancient binding rites with state-of-the-art security. In a demonstration closed to all but a dozen attendees, archivists revealed the integrated system, holographic data cubes, blockchain provenance, biometric and dynamic prayer-based authentication, and environmental safeguards, all overseen by annual liturgical reinforcements in the crypt. While the visiting conservators praised the ingenuity, they remained unaware of the manuscript's true subject matter. Meanwhile, the Vatican Library quietly erected a memorial plaque inscribed in Latin and hidden behind a movable panel in the crypt to commemorate generations of unnamed scribes and custodians who had maintained the secret prison of celestial rebels. The plaque's final line, Lex spiritualis vincit omnia, spiritual law conquers all, echoed in the minds of those who had witnessed the demonstration. Back in Rome, the librarian penned a confidential reflection. The fusion of faith and innovation had preserved an ancient covenant, yet the greatest challenge lay not in technology, but in sustaining the devotion required to keep those covenants alive. Thus, as the symposium dispersed to distant archives, the Vatican's custodians returned to their subterranean watch, confident that their multi-layered fortress built of scripture, stone, ceremony, and code would endure for centuries to come. In the summer of 2032, a discreet study within the Vatican's archival ranks turned its attention to long-term succession planning for the Angelorum custodians. Recognizing that the unique blend of theological knowledge, conservation expertise, and ritual devotion could not be captured in manuals alone, the prefect of the Vatican Library initiated a mentorship framework. Senior archivists were paired with younger colleagues in a confidential apprenticeship, which combined hands-on training in vault protocols with guided reflection on the spiritual dimensions of their charge. Apprentices sat alongside masters during Holy Thursday vigils, learning the cadence of binding prayers, then shadowed conservators in the restoration lab to understand the delicate techniques that preserved brittle parchment. By rotating mentorship assignments every 5 years, the program sought to prevent burnout and ensure that no individual bore the weight of secrecy alone. Simultaneously, the Cardinal Archivist approved a companion spiritual retreat at the monastery of San Paolo alle Tre Fontane, where mentors and apprentices would spend 3 days in silent prayer, meditating on passages from the Epistle of Jude and envisioning the ancient tribunal that had condemned the Watchers. Feedback from the inaugural cohort, recorded in confidential journals, highlighted the transformative impact. Archivists reported deeper resilience during routine duties and a renewed sense of purpose that transcended mere duty. Through this intentional investment in human continuity, the Vatican affirmed that the prison of celestial rebels depends as much on hearts and minds as on locks and codes. The enduring legacy of the Angelorum archives would thus rest not only in multifaceted security systems, but in a living lineage of devoted guardians, each entrusted to renew the bonds of faith that have held the Watchers captive for pride. Nearly 2 millennia. Rest your mind, you've earned it. But when the next veil lifts, be here. Subscribe. In the winter of 2033, the Vatican Library confronted a rare logistical trial when earthquake tremors rattled Rome, reminding custodians of the vulnerability inherent in subterranean repositories. Although initial assessments reported no structural damage to the Angelorum vault, aftershocks prompted the prefect of the Vatican Library to order a full seismic retrofitting of the crypt's support pillars. Engineers installed hidden vibration dampers, steel springs, and shock absorbers embedded within the masonry to isolate the vault from tremors above. Concurrently, conservators undertook a thorough inspection of each manuscript's binding and sewing supports, reinforcing weakened spines with archival-quality linen cords to guard against jolts. To integrate the spiritual dimension of this work, the Cardinal Archivist commissioned a brief liturgical rite of dedication. Archivists and chaplains gathered at the vault's entrance, where a low candlelit prayer invoked Psalm 46, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble," and each participant lightly anointed the base of the vault's columns with holy water. This ritual consecration, performed immediately after the engineering teams completed their installations, symbolized a partnership between human ingenuity and divine protection. Staff reports noted a palpable sense of renewal among the custodians, who felt that the ancient prison of rebellious angels had been fortified not only by steel and mortar, but by collective faith. As the Vatican's restoration and security teams filed their confidential after-action report, they affirmed that the layers of seismic safeguards would ensure that both parchment and prayer remained unshaken for generations to come. By the spring of 2033, the Vatican Library's security apparatus extended beyond physical and digital domains into the realm of human networks. In April, a confidential audit of personnel clearances revealed that several long-serving custodians had moved into semi-retirement, leaving critical roles understaffed. To address this, the prefect of the Vatican Library sanctioned a specialized recruitment drive targeting monastic scholars and archivists with proven expertise in paleography, theology, and conservation science. Prospective recruits underwent a rigorous vetting process, background checks, theological examinations, and an informal retreat at a secluded monastery, where candidates participated in daily binding prayers alongside existing staff. Those who completed the retreat were invited to apprentice under senior custodians, learning vault protocols, digital security measures, and the liturgical rhythms that underscored the Angelorum guardianship. Concurrently, a discreet mentorship covenant was drafted, requiring each new member to swear an oath of perpetual confidentiality before a relic-encrusted altar beneath St. Peter's, a solemn ceremony illuminated by torchlight and accompanied by whispered verses from the Book of Enoch. This recruitment and initiation framework ensured that the human network safeguarding the imprisoned angels remained robust, balanced by both intellectual rigor and spiritual commitment. As the Vatican Library adjusted to evolving personnel needs, it reaffirmed a timeless truth. The prison of celestial rebels relies as much on the hearts and hands of devoted guardians as on the technologies and rituals that surround them. In the summer of 2034, the Vatican Library faced renewed pressure to integrate its secret collections with emerging international digital standards, as the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, launched a pilot on global digital heritage. Although the Vatican publicly praised the initiative's aim to preserve collective memory, its archivists knew that exposing the Angelorum dossiers, even in abstracted form, posed unacceptable risks. Under the guidance of the prefect of the Vatican Library, a confidential policy paper was drafted. The Vatican would contribute metadata to UNESCO's platform, but would withhold any direct or indirect references to the binding rites or celestial prison. At the same time, a closed working group refined the Vatican's own off-grid archive protocol, establishing an independent, air-gapped network to mirror essential catalog data without connectivity to external systems. To sanctify this dual strategy, the Cardinal Archivist commissioned a brief mid-year binding ceremony in the crypt chapel, invoking Psalm 18. He laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever, as a reminder that some knowledge must rest on unshakable pillars. Archivists recorded the ritual in private ledgers, noting that the act of synchronizing liturgy with technical isolation reinforced their layered defense. By engaging selectively with global initiatives while fortifying their off-grid archive, the Vatican demonstrated how it could participate in 21st century heritage efforts without compromising the sacred charge to protect the prison of rebellious angels. As autumn of 2034 deepened, the Vatican Library prepared for a discreet yet profound renewal of its most solemn tradition, the quinquennial Grand Vigil for the imprisoned angels. Historically held every 5 years, This event required orchestrating a convergence of archivists, liturgists, Swiss guards, and select scholars, each sworn to the utmost secrecy. In October, the prefect of the Vatican Library issued sealed invitations, delivered by hand, instructing participants to gather in the crypt beneath St. Peter's at the stroke of midnight. The ceremony commenced with the tolling of the ancient bronze bell, its sonorous peals echoing off stone walls lined with iron-bound chests. A senior liturgist intoned the ledger's opening verse from the Epistle of Jude. Then each custodian, in turn, processed before the vault doors, placing hand upon key and repeating a randomized binding formula drawn from the restored Book of Enoch. Swiss guards stood sentinel, halberds lowered, their presence a reminder of the union between martial vigilance and spiritual duty. As the final verse resounded, the cardinal archivist affixed a ceremonial seal, freshly inked with holy chrism across the vault's iron bands. In a hush that followed, torches were extinguished one by one, symbolizing the unseen chains growing stronger in darkness. The entire rite spanned 77 minutes, after which participants departed in silence, leaving the crypt's heavy doors undisturbed until the next scheduled renewal. This grand vigil reaffirmed the Vatican's enduring conviction that every generation must awaken its faith to reforge the bonds that keep the watchers captive, lest lapse invite chaos into both earthly and celestial realms. In the frigid dawn of November 2034, as Rome slept beneath a pale crescent moon, the Vatican Library's conservators faced an unexpected crisis. A sudden power outage interrupted the vault's climate control systems for nearly 2 hours. Emergency generators kicked in, but the interruption triggered alarm protocols and invoked a rapid response liturgical procedure among the archivists on duty. Within minutes, a small team descended into the crypt, carrying portable lamps and hand-cranked ventilators. As the flicker of lantern light revealed the iron-bound chests and their sacred contents, the cardinal archivist led a petition of intercession, chanting a blend of Psalm 121. "My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth," and selected binding verses from the Book of Enoch. Conservators worked by torchlight to stabilize temperature and humidity, pressing sylph-like cloths to the vault door's seals and cranking fresh air into the chamber. Throughout the makeshift vigil, the archivists rotated their duties, monitoring environmental gauges, reciting prayers, and gently inspecting parchment edges for signs of stress. After 2 hours, full power was restored, and the climate systems hummed back to life. In the quiet that followed, the team recorded a confidential after-action log. The spontaneous liturgical response had prevented any damage, reinforcing their belief that prayer and practical skill must go hand in hand. As daylight filtered through the Vatican gardens above, the archivists emerged from the crypt, weary but resolute, having once again demonstrated that guarding the prison of fallen angels demands readiness to respond both technically and spiritually whenever the delicate balance of parchment, prayer, and protection is threatened. In the quiet hush that followed the crisis resolution, the Vatican Library's archivists initiated a comprehensive review of all emergency protocols governing the Angelorum vault. Led by the prefect of the Vatican Library and the cardinal archivist, the review convened in the crypt's antechamber, where participants assembled around a heavy oak table bearing the sealed after-action log. Each procedure, from power failure responses to climate control redundancies, was scrutinized alongside the liturgical interventions that had salvaged the manuscripts. Conservators presented annotated diagrams of the vault's environmental systems, highlighting potential single points of failure, while theologians recited binding prayers to underscore the spiritual dimension of each technical safeguard. The group agreed to formalize what had previously been improvised, a codified right and response manual that wove together step-by-step engineering checklists with prescribed invocations drawn from ancient sources. This manual would be distributed to all custodial staff, accompanied by a private ceremony in which each recipient would touch its leather-bound cover and pledge to uphold both the practical and divine elements of their charge. A final entry in the meeting minutes, sealed under the signet of the Cardinal Archivist, emphasized that preserving the Angelorum archive required not merely contingency plans, but a living tradition of integrated devotion and expertise. By institutionalizing the lessons learned, the Vatican ensured that its guardians would be equipped, in every future emergency, with the tools of science and the power of prayer needed to protect the celestial prison and the fragile parchments that bear its story. As winter's first frost coated the Vatican gardens in January 2035, the library's custodians faced yet another dimension of preservation, the psychological resilience of their support staff. In the hush of the underground vault, security officers and maintenance personnel, though not direct stewards of the Angelorum texts, reported unease at times when the iron-bound doors swung open or the torches flickered in drafts. Recognizing that morale and vigilance were intertwined, the prefect of the Vatican Library commissioned a series of briefings for all ancillary staff, led by senior archivists alongside spiritual counselors. Held in the crypt's antechamber, these sessions combined practical overviews of the vault's risk management procedures, lock maintenance, climate controls, emergency drills with shared readings from the Epistle of Jude, and reflections on the enduring moral lessons of vigilance against corruption. Participants were encouraged to ask questions, dispel misconceptions, and internalize their roles as part of a larger guardianship. At the close of each briefing, everyone present paused to recite a simple prayer for fidelity. No longer the full binding rites, but a unifying invocation, asking for protection over both the texts and those who serviced their surroundings. In subsequent weeks, reports showed that ancillary staff felt more connected to the mission, reporting issues promptly and approaching their duties with renewed care. By extending custodial formation beyond the core archivists, the Vatican reinforced the principle that safeguarding the prison of fallen angels rested on a communal commitment where every lantern bearer and bolt turner played a part in upholding the delicate bond between human stewardship and divine mandate. In the spring of 2035, the Vatican Library quietly assessed the long-term archival strategies for the Angelorum manuscripts in light of projected technological obsolescence. With advances in data storage moving at breakneck speed, there was growing concern that even the most robust blockchain and encryption protocols could be rendered archaic within a few decades. To anticipate this, the prefect of the Vatican Library established a forward-looking task force comprising archivists, IT futurists, and theologians. Their mandate was to draft a cyclical technology succession plan, outlining processes for migrating digital archives, including holographic data cubes and VR models, to emerging platforms every 10 years. The plan stipulated that each migration be accompanied by a ceremonial blessing in the crypt's antechamber. Invoking Psalm 90, "Teach us to number our days," as a meditation on the passage of time and the necessity of renewal. Task force members also devised criteria for technology selection, prioritizing systems with open-source components to mitigate vendor lock-in and ensure future interpretability. In confidential minutes, The group acknowledged that while hardware and software might evolve, the spiritual commitment to bind the Watchers must remain constant. By codifying a schedule of technical updates tied to liturgical observances, the Vatican ensured that its digital sanctum would withstand shifting paradigms, merging the imperatives of innovation with the enduring power of prayer to safeguard the secrets of celestial rebellion across the centuries. As midsummer arrived in 2035, the Vatican Library prepared for an unprecedented public outreach effort. A curated exhibition of its most extraordinary but non-sensitive angelic manuscripts. While the Angelorum folios themselves remained sealed, the library displayed lavishly illuminated codices that traced the broader iconography and theology of angels in medieval art. The exhibition was accompanied by scholarly lectures and published essays exploring angelic virtues, hierarchies, and roles in salvation history, carefully omitting any mention of the imprisoned Watchers. Behind the scenes, the prefect of the Vatican Library and the cardinal archivist reviewed every display, label, audio guide, script, and catalog entry to ensure that none inadvertently hinted at the binding rights. Meanwhile, vault custodians intensified their routine checks, mindful that increased visitor traffic above could translate into subtle shifts in environmental conditions below. On opening night, as bishops and ambassadors toured the exhibition under soft gallery lighting, archivists monitored remote sensors in the crypt, confirming that temperature and humidity held steady. A confidential after-action note recorded satisfaction. The exhibition successfully engaged the faithful and scholars alike, reinforcing public appreciation for Angelology's beauty, while the true prison of celestial transgression remained safeguarded beneath layers of ritual, protocol, and sacred trust. In the autumn of 2035, the Vatican Library celebrated the completion of the quinquennial cycle of its technology succession plan and held a final private commission to evaluate the health of both manuscripts and custodians. Archivists gathered in the crypt's antechamber as dusk fell, each presenting reports on the state of physical parchments, digital backups, and personnel well-being. Conservation scientists confirmed that mylar-sleeved folios showed no new stress fractures, while IT teams verified the integrity of quantum-resistant encrypted archives. Spiritual counselors reported that rotating staff through retreats and mentorships had sustained morale, preventing burnout among the core Angelorum team. To mark this achievement, the Cardinal Archivist led a brief ritual, a recitation of selective binding verses from the Epistle of Jude and the Book of Enoch, followed by a prayer of thanksgiving drawn from Psalm 150. Each participant placed a symbolic stone upon a small altar, signifying the communal burden and privilege of their charge. As the final chant faded, the prefect declared the cycle complete, affirming that the prison of rebellious angels, anchored now by iron, ink, code, and devotion had been renewed in spirit and safeguarded against the shifting tides of time. With that, the custodians extinguished the torches and departed, readying themselves to continue their watch in the quiet darkness beneath Rome's sacred stones. That was one layer. Take a moment, then subscribe, and we'll go deeper next time.